didn't have to be abducted to be changed. No lights in the sky, no ship descending in a beam of blue, no cold metal table in the belly of something unearthly. Just a road, dark, empty, familiar, until it isn't. You're driving down a lonely road, and the night feels heavier than it should. The trees on either side blur into a wall of shadow, and the stars seem to flicker like they're watching. Then it happens. Not a sound, not even a motion, just a presence. Something massive lifts above the tree line, not flying, not floating, just there, glowing and watching. Your headlights dim, the engine sputters, your hands tremble on the wheel, the hair on your arms stands straight up, and somewhere deep in your body, you feel something shifting. The object vanishes as quietly as it appeared, and you can finally breathe again. You drive home in silence. You try to sleep, but can't, because you know something is off. And no matter how hard you try to convince yourself it was just a dream, deep down you know the truth. You were touched, altered, rewritten. What if this happened to you? Tonight, we have 3 stories. They're about the ones who got too close and paid the price.
Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another spine-chilling episode of Relative Perspective Paranormal Confessions. As always, I'm your host, Steven, and tonight we're diving into some dangerous territory. Because this isn't about strange lights up in the sky or mysterious figures standing at your doorstep. This is what happens when a UFO doesn't just pass you by, it changes who you are. Tonight we're going to be talking about real people with real injuries and scars that they carried with them for the rest of their lives. So go ahead and lock your doors, check the skies, and to settle in, because tonight we're diving into the world of the close encounters of the second kind, where fear, it doesn't just come from being taken, it comes from being left behind. You know, when most folks hear of a UFO encounter, they think of something different. You know, they think of a light way off in the sky in the distance, or they see a blurry video on TikTok or on their phone, or they hear a crazy story from a drunk dude in a bar. But buried in the dusty files of the unexplained, there are stories that feel way different. Because these people didn't just see something, they were hurt by it. They were burned, blistered, and scarred in ways that doctors just can't explain. And in every case, the government either said nothing or they showed up way too fast. So, ask yourself, what is really going on here? Let's get into it. It was a cold December night just outside Dayton, Texas. You had Betty Cash, her friend Vicky Landrum, and Vicky's 7-year-old grandson, Colby. They were all headed back from a nice Christmas dinner. You had 3 people in a quiet Oldsmobile cruising down a 2-lane road deep in the pine-covered forest. Now, the only lights that they saw were from their headlights and a faint orange haze from a distant city down below the hill. Then, around 9 p.m., they saw something. At first, it looked like a bright light hanging low above the tree line. Betty thought it might be a plane coming in for Houston International. But Vicky, I think she knew better. She leaned in, she squinted, and she said, "This thing is not a plane. It's flying way too low." Now, whatever this was, it was moving, and it was getting way too close. As the road was curving around, they came around this bend, and that's when they saw it. A massive metallic diamond-shaped craft. It wasn't way far off, but it was right there in front of them. It was floating about 30 feet off the ground and dead silent. It had no wings, no markings. It had just a band of blue lights glowing faintly around this thing. And from the bottom, they had bursts of flames shooting downward. Each time it fired, it would move just a little bit. And the road lit up with fire and shadows from the trees. And then the car started heating up. Inside the car, Vicky wiped sweat from her forehead. She looked around nervously, and she whispered, "This must be a sign from God." Now, that's when Vicky reached for the door to try to get out, but Betty was just a little bit quicker. She got to the door handle first, and she jumped out before Vicky. Big mistake. Betty, she stepped outside in what should have been a cold night, but it wasn't cold anymore. The heat, it hit her like a wall. It was thick, suffocating, and heavy. Now, anybody that lives in the South during the summertime knows exactly what this feels like, but I'm sure it was just a little bit hotter for her, standing right next to this damn UFO. She turned to get back in, she reached for the door handle and grabbed it, and she screamed as loud as she could in pain. Because the door handle got so hot that when she touched it, it burned her skin. She took off her jacket, wrapped it around her hand, and she had to use that jacket to open the door to get back in. Back inside, Vicky, she's in a daze. She places her hand on the dashboard, and her fingers literally sink into the dashboard. The vinyl had actually melted like wax in the hot summer sun. I mean, it hadn't been hours, it'd only been minutes. How in the hell can it get that hot for when someone puts their hands on a dashboard, their hands melt to the dashboard? But after that, silence broke. They heard rotors and dozens of them. Out of nowhere, the skies had filled with the sound of helicopters. Big, huge black military-style helicopters, and they were unmarked. They came flying in low and fast, and they actually circled this craft. Then they started following it like they knew exactly where this thing was going. And then that's when the craft let out one more blast of fire, lifted up above the trees, and vanished into the night. And the helicopters were right behind this thing. They followed close behind until all of their lights disappeared behind the tree line. And just like that, the road was quiet once again. Betty, Vicky, and Colby, they sat there in shock, breathing hard, and not yet realizing whatever that was that they saw, it had already done its damage. Now, they get home thinking everything's okay. Of course, they're still scared, but they think they're in the clear. Later on that night, though, Betty, she collapses in her kitchen. By morning, she was vomiting, her skin was red and inflamed, and she had clumps of hair falling out of her head. You had Vicky and Colby. They didn't get out of the car, but they weren't spared. Their skin burned too, and they had nausea and vomiting and headaches, but it wasn't nowhere near as bad as what Betty had. But still, it was bad enough to scare them. Later that day, they rushed Betty to the hospital and she was put in isolation, and the doctors ran all kinds of tests, but they could not explain what was happening to Miss Betty. The only thing that they could say was this was radiation burns. But here's the thing, Betty hadn't been anywhere near radiation. She hadn't been exposed to anything. She had just seen something. And from that day on, she was never the same. Now, Betty never fully recovered. She later developed breast cancer, and she was in and out of the hospital each year for 18 years until she passed away in 1998. Now, like I said, Vicky didn't have it as bad as Becky, but she didn't get away unscathed. She ended up getting cataracts in both of her eyes, and she had other health issues too. Colby, the little boy in the back seat, he came away kind of okay. He had some problems, but he wasn't as bad as his grandmother Vicky. But all three of them remembered the blue lights, the heat, and those crazy looking helicopters. And what's bad is no one ever gave them any answers. Now, the official response, there really wasn't one. No flight logs, no admission, and what's really bad, there was no apology. The government denied sending any helicopters, and they denied all activity out there. Duh. They said there was no operation, no craft, and no encounter. You only had 3 civilians, one who lost her life, one who lost her sight, and one who walked away, but never forgot. Now, to this day, the Cash-Landrum Incident is still one of the most disturbing and well-documented UFO cases in UFO history. And if Betty's story is true, then maybe the scariest part wasn't what she saw, it's what she brought home. Our next case happened in Argentina in 1950. You had Dr. Enrique Bota. He wasn't some wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. He was a respected physician in Venezuela. Now, this dude was really, really educated, highly regarded. He even had a background in engineering. Now, that summer, he was in Argentina consulting on a rural infrastructure project. He was actually helping build new roads in the countryside. The mornings out there were quiet, uneventful, and pretty much empty. One day, just after sunrise, he was driving down a country road near a town called Bahia Blanca all alone. There was no cars, no people, and just open pale skies in every direction. Then something caught his eye off to the side of the road. At first, he thought it might be a car crash. Maybe someone veered off to the side of the road and rolled over in a ditch. So he slows his car and starts scanning the area for hopefully nobody got hurt. And that's when he sees it, clear as a bell. This thing had no windows, no doors, no wheels, and no signs of impact. It was just a smooth metallic object about 20 feet across, and it looked like it was half buried into the earth, like it had dropped out of the sky. There was no fire, no smoke, no sound, just stillness. And that silence, it didn't feel calm, it felt wrong. Now, Bota slows down and he parks his car, and for some ungodly reason, he gets out. He walks around the object. It's cold and still, but that's when he sees it. There was a hatch. It was oval-shaped, and it was just big enough for him to squeeze through. He hesitates just for a second, but curiosity wins, and he climbs in. Now, when he gets inside, it's really, really dark, and the only light that he sees is this red pulsing light on the ceiling. His eyes start to adjust, and that's when he sees them. He saw 3 small seats arranged kind of around this little control panel, and he noticed gauges and meters on the wall, but nothing was moving. Nothing was operating. And sitting in those seats were 3 humanoid figures. He said they were about 4 feet tall, and they were wearing a tight gray skin-hugging suit. Now these things, they weren't moving, and they weren't breathing. Bota decides to try to get their attention, so he whispers something, but there's no reply. Now, he steps a little bit closer to these things. He leans in, he puts his hand on the wall, but he said it didn't feel like metal. He said it almost felt organic, almost like skin. Then he walks over and he touches one of the bodies. Big, huge mistake. He said the skin felt hard, dry, and charred, almost like these things were burnt from the inside out. He said these things didn't just feel dead, they felt like they were gone. And that's when the panic hit him. Now, this guy must be pretty tough, because if it was me, I would have panicked a long time ago. Now, that's when he bolts out of the craft. He tries to get through that little hole. He jumps in his car and he hauls ass right back to town. When he gets back into town, he runs into 2 of his colleagues or his buddies, and he tells them what he saw. Now, at first, they didn't believe him, but they realized this guy's not a liar. He's a pretty upstanding dude. And when they saw his face, how scared he was, that's when they knew they better believe him. So they grabbed their weapons, jumped in their cars, and hauled butt back to the site. But when they got there, everything was gone. They had no disc, no hatch, no bodies. It was all gone. Now, all that's left is a big, huge pile of black ash. Now, one of the men decides to bend down and scoop some of this stuff up with his bare hands. Mistake number 2, because within minutes, the palm of his hand became purple, and it stayed like that for 3 days. Now, these guys are standing there, stunned, when suddenly they saw 3 red lights appear in the sky. They were moving fast, low, and in a perfect formation. That's when they knew that it was it. They're done. They needed to get their butts out of there. So they jump in the car, they haul butt. Now, Bota didn't realize this, but his nightmare was just beginning. Within days, his skin starts blistering. His face swells up, except for the pale outline of his sunglasses burned into his skin like it was a mask. He actually looked like someone that had spent days in the sun, but it wasn't a sunburn. He said it was way worse. Then, like Miss Betty, came the fever, the nausea, and the fatigue. Now, he was rushed to the hospital, and doctors suspected maybe he had some kind of radiation poison. They ran all kinds of tests, but they didn't find nothing. There was no radiation, no infection, and no illness whatsoever. Just a man who actually touched something that he never should have. Now, for years, Bota stayed silent. This guy, he refused to talk about it. He wanted to bury it, and he just wanted to live his life. He wanted to move on. But this thing, it stayed with him. It never left him. He decided one day, decades later, that he was going to tell a room full of UFO researchers everything that he'd seen. And to this day, it's considered one of the most bizarre and credible UFO reports coming out of South America. But here's what no one can answer. Why was that craft gone hours later? What killed those beings? And what did those red lights come back for? What were they doing? Now, the big thing about Bota, he may have walked away, but something walked away with him. It was on his skin, in his blood, and in his nightmares. Because he didn't just see something that morning, he stepped into it. And when it was over, something stepped into him. By all accounts, Lonnie Zamora was the last guy that you'd expect to see in a UFO case file. Now, this guy was a no-nonsense police officer, I'm sure you know the kind, and he lived in a city called Socorro, New Mexico. Now, this guy wasn't a believer. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was just a cop doing his job, making his rounds. It was late afternoon on April 24th of 1964. The sky was cloudless, the air was dry, and the sun just started to dip below the horizon. Now, Zamora was on the edge of town driving down this old road with sirens off, kicking up dust. Then, off in the distance, that's when he sees it. He sees a flash of light low over the brush. He said it wasn't any lightning, and it didn't look like a flare. He said it looked like something had come down really fast into a dry creek bed between two hills. And it didn't look like a crash. Now, that's when Zamora, he eases off the gas, stops chasing that speeder he was chasing. He turns down that road and he starts going towards that light that he saw. As the brush starts thinning out, he climbs over this hill. In the shallow ravine below, sitting on four metallic legs, was a white egg-shaped object. He says it was like the shape of an RV. It was smooth and seamless. It didn't have any windows. There was no smoke. He said it was just sitting there just like it landed gently. But that's not what stopped this man cold. He said there was two small figures. He said they were wearing white coveralls and moving around this thing real quick. It's like they were checking something at the base of their craft. Now, Zamora squints. He leans in and he realizes these things were real short. And he realizes they weren't kids and they were acting just like they didn't belong there. He's frozen and watching. He's trying to make sense of all this. That's when one of the figures looks up and sees him. Now, both of them bolt straight into their craft, and seconds later, you hear a deafening roar that explodes in that creek bed. He saw a huge blast of blue flame that shoots out the bottom of this thing, and it scorches the earth around it. And just like that, the object lifts up, it tilts, and takes off into the sky. It was fast, smooth, and no sound once it was airborne. And within seconds, it vanishes over the hills. This thing was gone. Now, Zamora is still sitting there, gripping his steering wheel, and his mouth is wide open. Then he reaches for his radio, and this time, it ain't about a speeder. Now, within minutes, other officers show up to the scene. Here's what they find. They had burned vegetation, and they had 4 impressions in the dirt where the landing gear touched down. And then there's Zamora. He's pale and shaking, and looking like he just saw something that he couldn't unsee. He walks them through it, every single detail. But here's the thing. This guy has never changed his story, not once. Not in 1964, not 10 years later, not ever. What's crazy about this, you got the FBI showing up, and then you have the U.S. Air Force, which is Project Blue Book. I'm sure you've heard of it. You have the investigators, they're combing the site, they're taking measurements, they're documenting the burns, and they're analyzing the soil. Now, they even bring in military engineers trying to find out what the hell landed in that creek bed. Here's what they found. The burn marks were real, the soil had been scorched, and the landing impressions were deep and symmetrical. And they also noticed there was no tire tracks leading up to this thing, no prank setup, and no explanation at all. Lonnie, he didn't want any attention. He didn't want to go talk to the press. He turned down interviews from talk shows and TV shows, and he just hated the attention. He just kept saying, I saw what I saw, and that's it. After months of analysis, the final report from Project Blue Book was this. It was just one word, unexplained. And that's how it stayed. This case, it had everything. It had a credible witness, physical evidence, multiple investigators, and they couldn't find any motive for a hoax. Because Zamora wasn't looking for fame. He just wanted to get back to work. But what he saw, it never left him. Now here's the part that gives me the chills. Now, Zamora, he wasn't abducted and he wasn't injured, but in the weeks that followed, he started having ringing in his ears and headaches. And another weird thing, that patch of grass where that craft had landed, it never grew back. Nothing ever grew back there ever again. The ground itself was changed. Some say it might have been radiation, and others thought it could have been a chemical burn from an advanced propulsion system. But no one can prove it, and no one ever has. Or maybe they have, and they're just not telling us. Okay, let's zoom out just for a minute. You had 3 groups of people, 3 decades, and 3 different countries. And yet the same disturbing pattern. You had a strange craft, intense heat, physical injuries, and no real explanation as to what happened. So what are we looking at, guys? Are these misidentified military experiments? Is it secret propulsion tech that's decades ahead of what we're told? Or is it something else entirely? What if it's something that wasn't supposed to be here, but it doesn't care if you get in the way? Because one thing is clear, sometimes you don't have to be abducted to be marked by a UFO. Just getting too close is enough. And if this is what happens to the ones that survived, how bad was it for the ones that don't? Well, it was kind of fun. First UFO story. That's pretty cool. I mean, we talked about cryptids and ghosts and demons and exorcisms. This was our first UFO thing. So, why don't you go ahead and put down in the comments if y'all want to hear some more of the UFO alien type stuff, and I will definitely talk about it. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Relative Perspective Paranormal Confessions. As always, I'm your host, Steven, and I want to give a big shout out to all of our truth seekers that keep these stories alive. Now, if you like this episode, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and share this story with people that aren't afraid to look up in the sky. We're on all the social media platforms. I'll go ahead and put a link to everything down below if you want to check us out. If you got a creepy encounter or a paranormal confession, go ahead and send it to me at relativeperspective76@gmail.com. I'd love to read your story, and who knows, we might be able to showcase it in a future episode. Next time, we're diving deep into another spine-chilling episode. Don't miss it, so go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and if you see a strange light in the sky, maybe don't stick around. I want to thank you again for watching. God bless you, we love you, and good night. All right, we did it without a teleprompter. Thank you. We did it. God bless you. Love you. Bye.